The city gleamed like it had something to prove. Skyscrapers clawed the clouds, their glass skin flashing the colors of ambition. Inside the grand ballroom, laughter rose like champagne bubbles. Expensive, hollow, rehearsed. Suits shimmered beneath chandeliers that dripped with light. Words like empire, legacy, and growth floated above the clinking of glasses, while pride sat heavy in the air. Outside, the night wind carried a different rhythm. The rustle of paper cups, the shuffle of worn shoes, the sigh of forgotten dreams. A man stood there, watching through the glass. Not bitterness, not envy, just a quiet knowing. The kind of knowing that doesn't need an audience. Inside, they measured success by applause. Outside, he measured it by peace. And as the doors opened for the world's wealthiest, the city's poorest took one slow step closer. As if destiny had quietly whispered his name, he moved through the revolving doors like a shadow entering daylight. The air inside felt heavier. Perfumed, electric, charged with success. Every surface gleamed, polished by ambition. The music was soft, but the laughter was loud enough to drown it. No one noticed him at first. The guards exchanged uncertain glances, then looked away. Something about the stillness in his eyes disarmed their training. He didn't belong here, not by the world's measure. Yet there was something regal in his quiet. He looked around, not at the chandeliers or the trophies of gold, but at the people, their eyes glazed with achievement and exhaustion. Somewhere deep in the hum of self-celebration, he whispered, "So much light, and still so much darkness." A hush moved through the staff near the entrance, a ripple of discomfort too polite to speak. One of the security guards started forward, his hand lifting halfway, but Elijah only smiled. The kind of smile that tells you he means no harm. People passed him with careful blindness, pretending not to see. That's the art of privilege, to erase without malice. Then came a voice over the microphone announcing the evening's keynote. Jonathan Hale, Building Empires of Tomorrow. The crowd turned, applauded. Elijah turned too, his gaze following the name he didn't yet know. His lips parted, as if remembering something long forgotten. The moment hung, a soul lost in the crowd, standing where he was never meant to stand, yet exactly where destiny placed him. The speech echoed through the ballroom, polished, powerful, perfectly rehearsed. "Success," Jonathan declared, "isn't luck. It's discipline. It's hunger. It's the refusal to settle for less." Applause thundered. Elijah listened, silent, each word landing like a memory of another life. He once said things like that to children who believed in dreams more than dollars. He stepped forward, only a few inches, yet it felt like crossing a line between two worlds. No one turned to look. The glitter and ego blinded them to his presence. But one woman noticed Claire. Her eyes filled not with fear but wonder. She could sense it. Something divine was about to interrupt their script. Then, as the applause reached its peak, silence fell. Sudden and sharp, the microphone slipped slightly in Jonathan's hand as his eyes caught sight of the man in the back. Something unspoken passed between them, like recognition without reason. Elijah didn't move. He just looked steady and calm, a mirror of everything Jonathan's soul avoided. For a heartbeat, the entire room felt the weight of that gaze. Though none could name why, Claire rose slowly, breath shallow, drawn toward the quiet figure. The host tried to continue, his words stumbling as the sound technician adjusted the mic, and in that trembling pause, destiny held its breath. The man no one invited had just entered every heart in the room. For a moment, the silence was unbearable. Then came the whispers. Soft, sharp, multiplying like ripples across a still pond. A man in a tattered coat didn't belong among those who wore success like armor. Two guards approached quietly, their steps deliberate, rehearsed in removal. Yet the man didn't flinch. He simply stood, calm as dawn, eyes steady, as if the noise couldn't touch him. The host at the stage shifted his weight, searching for words to restore control. "Sir, this is a private event," one of the guards said, his tone polite but uneasy. The man nodded once. "I know," he replied softly, "but I think I was invited, just not by you." His voice carried through the room like smoke, gentle, haunting, undeniable. A murmur filled the space, fragile and judgmental. Someone laughed nervously, another whispered for security to hurry. But Claire spoke first, her voice cutting through the noise like a bell. "Wait." The guards froze mid-step. She didn't know why she said it, only that something inside refused to let them silence him. Jonathan looked at her, disbelief clouding his charm. "Claire, please," he said under his breath. "This isn't." But she ignored him. The man turned slightly, meeting her gaze, and nodded in gratitude. "Sometimes," he said softly, "the poorest man carries the richest truth." The words landed in the center of the room, heavier than any speech before it. Even the lights seemed to dim in reverence. Jonathan's smile returned, but it was thinner now. Brittle. "Sir," he said smoothly, "I admire your courage, but this is a business conference, not..." The man raised his hand gently, not in defiance, but peace. "Then maybe business needs a little humanity," he replied. A low gasp rippled through the crowd. No arrogance, no performance, just truth spoken plainly, like a mirror placed before them. Jonathan hesitated, his script slipping from memory. He glanced at Claire, then at the crowd. Every eye was locked on the stranger who refused to bow. The guards lingered, unsure, until Jonathan, for reasons he couldn't name, said, "Let him speak." The words surprised even him, and the man smiled, as though heaven had just cleared its throat. He stepped forward, the weight of his footsteps echoing louder than applause. The microphone trembled slightly in his hand, but his voice was steady, almost melodic. "I used to teach," he began. "Not wealth, not power, but worth. I taught children who had nothing to believe they were everything." The room was still. Even Jonathan's practiced mask softened. "Then life taught me," he continued, "that losing everything isn't punishment, it's permission. Permission to see what really matters." The air thickened with emotion. No one blinked. Somewhere in the back, a tear fell. The first crack in the armor of the powerful. For a moment, no one moved. The city's brightest minds, the world's richest hearts, all silenced by a man who had nothing left to lose but his truth. "You count what you've gained," he said, "but do you remember what you've given?" His eyes met Jonathan's, and the host looked away first. "You build towers to be remembered, but the only legacy that lasts," Elijah continued, "is love that outlives your name." The words struck deeper than any lecture, any deal, any speech of power. When he finished, there was no applause, just stillness. And in that stillness, something wholly moved through the room. The microphone hummed softly, like it knew this was sacred ground. No one spoke, no one moved. Even the cameras stopped flashing, as if the world itself paused to listen. Elijah's voice filled the silence, gentle but unyielding. "You see this coat?" he said, tugging at the fabric worn thin by years of wind and rain. "It's the only one I have left, but it's kept me warm. Not because of what it's made of, but because I learned to be grateful for what remains." A ripple of breath moved through the crowd. Every word he spoke stripped the room of its pride, leaving only truth behind. "You think wealth builds comfort," he continued softly, "but comfort, my friends, can build blindness." And in that moment, the noise of the world surrendered to wisdom. He paused, eyes drifting upward, as if searching for words that had been waiting for years to be heard. "I used to teach children," he said softly. About kindness, about giving before taking, about listening before speaking. The crowd leaned in, pulled by a gravity that had nothing to do with power. One day, I told them to bring one thing from home that made them feel loved. Most brought toys, some brought photos. But one little girl brought nothing. His voice trembled. She said, "Love doesn't live in things. It lives in people." The silence deepened. Raw, holy, alive. That day, I learned what no fortune could buy. His eyes shimmered. She taught me more than I ever taught her. He took a long breath, the kind that carries both pain and peace. I had everything once. A home, a classroom, a family. I taught about dreams, but I forgot to live them. When tragedy came, I ran from faith instead of through it. I lost my home, my name, my pride, and finally, I lost the man I thought I was. He looked down, voice barely above a whisper. But that's when I met the one thing success can never buy: grace. The words seemed to vibrate through the air, invisible yet undeniable. People lowered their heads, no longer hearing a man but a message. One that stripped away their illusions and left only the truth of the soul standing naked before them. The weight of confession hung in the air, thick with humanity. He looked over the crowd, his eyes full of forgiveness. "You see," he said, "poverty isn't the absence of money. It's the absence of meaning." The words echoed off marble and glass, sinking deep into hearts polished by pride. You can fill your pockets with gold, but if your hands never lift another soul, you've gained nothing. Jonathan exhaled shakily, as if the truth had found its way under his armor. Claire's tears streamed freely now. Even the security guards stood transfixed, their authority replaced by awe. Elijah's voice softened. "You cannot lead the world until you learn to kneel before it." When he finished speaking, silence didn't feel empty. It felt alive. The air pulsed with something unseen, something pure. Elijah smiled faintly, eyes glistening. "Maybe," he said, "you weren't meant to make more money. Maybe you were meant to make more meaning." His words lingered, floating like incense above bowed heads. For the first time, Jonathan lowered his gaze not from shame, but from reverence. The crowd began to rise slowly, not in applause, but in gratitude. Claire stepped forward, whispering, "Thank you." Elijah nodded once, humble, peaceful, and for the first time in years, the man who had lost everything gave the world something no one could buy: a glimpse of redemption. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Elijah's eyes lifted toward the crowd, not judging, but seeing. "Every soul here has a wound," he said softly. "Some hide it behind glass towers, others behind empty bottles or locked doors. Mine began when I lost my son." Gasps rippled quietly through the room. His tone never broke, but the tremor in his breath carried a universe of grief. "He was 12, he continued, and I was too busy chasing comfort to notice how far from him I'd drifted. When I finally looked up, it was too late. The words fell heavy as stone." Jonathan's hand tightened around the armrest. The room no longer saw a stranger. They saw themselves reflected in the ruin of a man reborn through pain. The man's voice softened, no longer a speech but a confession. "When I buried him," he whispered, "I buried my purpose too. I walked away from the classroom, from faith, from myself. I told the world I didn't believe anymore. Not in God, not in love." The audience watched through tears, their wealth rendered meaningless in the face of this raw honesty. Elijah looked down, smiling faintly through sorrow. "But the truth is, love never left me." "I did?" Jonathan's jaw trembled. A single tear broke free, tracing down his cheek. The room, once filled with ambition and applause, now held only reverence, not for power, but for the courage it takes to stand unmasked before strangers and still speak of hope. Then Elijah turned, eyes resting on Jonathan. The crowd felt the shift, the invisible line connecting the two men like a string pulled by fate. "You speak of building empires," he said softly. "But tell me, have you built peace?" Jonathan froze, the words striking too close. "You remind the world to chase success," Elijah continued. "But when did you last chase forgiveness?" Jonathan's breath caught, eyes glistening. He'd spent years pretending his own father's death didn't still echo inside him. The lights dimmed slightly, the room shrinking around their shared silence. "It's not your fortune that defines you," Elijah said. "It's the moment you choose to lay it down for someone else." The weight of truth settled like dust after a storm. Jonathan stood slowly, his voice barely holding. "I built everything to prove I wasn't nothing," he confessed. "And still, I feel empty." The admission broke the room open. Elijah nodded gently. No triumph in his face, only compassion. "Because you built with fear," he said, "not faith." The audience watched as two worlds, the gilded and the forgotten, finally met in the middle. Jonathan's tears fell freely now, his heart uncloaked. "How do I fix it?" he whispered. Elijah smiled faintly. "Start by seeing what's in front of you." He gestured toward the crowd, faces now wet with tears. "And remember, they're not your market. They're your mirror." The air shifted, not with noise, but with presence. Elijah took a slow breath, lowering the microphone. "This," he said softly, "is what wealth was meant to be. Not currency, but connection." He turned to Jonathan and whispered, "Your greatest investment will never live in your bank. It will live in the hearts you heal." Then he stepped back, letting the silence bloom. The crowd, once restless, now stood united in awe. For the first time, applause came. Not thunderous, not forced, but gentle, sacred, sincere. Jonathan pressed a hand over his heart. Claire wiped her tears, and Elijah, the man who walked in from the cold, smiled as if he'd finally come home. Long after Elijah's voice faded, the applause refused to die. But beneath it all, Jonathan's world was trembling. The noise became distant, muffled, like it came from another lifetime. His empire, the trophies, the speeches, the accolades, all seemed weightless now. He saw himself reflected in the ballroom's glass, standing tall but hollow. Elijah watched him quietly from the stage, no judgment in his eyes, only understanding. Jonathan turned, whispering to no one, "What have I done with my life?" The words barely left his lips, but they echoed through the vast hall, louder than any microphone. The applause slowed, uncertain. For the first time, the man who always had answers now stood utterly human, undone by truth. Jonathan sank back into his seat, the applause fading into whispers. His hands trembled as if holding invisible weight. "All these years," he murmured, "I built walls to keep the world impressed, and they became my prison." Elijah's gaze met his, tender but piercing. "Then maybe," Elijah said softly, "it's time to open a door." The crowd leaned in, sensing the fragile beauty of the moment. Claire stood slowly, crossing toward Jonathan. "You don't have to fix everything tonight," she whispered. "Just stop pretending it's not broken." Jonathan's chest shuddered. The room that once fed his ego now witnessed his surrender. Tears fell freely, unashamed. And for the first time, the man who taught others how to win learned the grace of losing. A storm moved quietly through Jonathan's chest. Memories of boardrooms, handshakes, hollow victories. He looked up at Elijah. "How did you survive losing everything?" Elijah smiled gently. "By realizing I hadn't lost the only thing that mattered, mercy." The words fell like rain on scorched earth. "I thought pain was punishment," Elijah continued. but it was preparation. Sometimes you're broken so you can hold what others drop. Jonathan closed his eyes, letting the truth sink deep. Claire pressed his hand, whispering, "You were allowed to start over." And in that instant, the crowd stopped seeing a billionaire and a beggar. They saw two men, both once lost, both finally found. Elijah's tone grew softer still, like a father soothing his child. "You build towers, Jonathan," he said. "But towers fall. Build bridges instead. They carry others." Jonathan rose slowly, his breath shaky, his eyes searching Elijah's. "I don't know where to begin," he admitted. Elijah smiled. "Right where you are." The simplicity disarmed. Claire wiped her face, whispering, "He's right." Jonathan exhaled, his composure melting away. The crowd, once fixated on success, now sat humbled by grace. For the first time, wealth bowed to wisdom. And as Elijah reached out his hand, Jonathan stepped forward, the two men's hands clasping in a quiet covenant of redemption. The applause that followed wasn't for performance, it was for truth. Jonathan turned to the crowd, voice trembling. "Tonight, I met a man who reminded me what real wealth is. It's not numbers, it's names. It's every life you lift higher than your own." The audience stood, hands meeting in solemn rhythm. Elijah smiled humbly, his eyes reflecting the flicker of chandelier light. Claire looked upward, whispering, "Thank you." And as the music swelled softly, Jonathan embraced Elijah, not as host and guest, but as brothers. The ballroom, once a temple of ego, became a sanctuary of grace. Outside, the city lights shimmered brighter, as if heaven itself was clapping along. The night's applause faded into the quiet hum of revelation. No one rushed to leave. No one reached for their phones. The air itself seemed to breathe slower, gentler. Jonathan stood beside Elijah, still wiping his eyes, his voice a whisper. "You changed everything tonight." Elijah smiled faintly. "No," he said. "Truth did." Around them, people began speaking softly, not about profits or mergers, but about purpose. Claire looked across the room and saw faces no longer divided by titles, but united by humility. Even Michael, the man who once preached ambition, found his words lost and his heart found. In that stillness, something sacred began, not an ending, but a beginning. Outside, the city pulsed with distant sirens and neon glow, but inside the conference hall, hearts were still. Jonathan approached the podium one last time, his voice raw yet steady. "Tomorrow, this event changes," he said. "From wealth to worth, from empire to empathy." The audience listened, moved not by his authority, but by his surrender. "We'll build homes, fund classrooms, feed cities, not to make headlines, but to make healing." Elijah nodded gently, his eyes glistening. Claire's hand brushed her cheek, wiping tears she no longer hid. It wasn't charity they were feeling, it was awakening. The kind that starts with one truth and grows into a revolution of the soul. As the crowd began to disperse, Elijah moved quietly through them. No entourage, no applause, just quiet smiles and gentle nods. People reached out to shake his hand, to thank him, but he deflected the praise with grace. "Don't thank me," he said softly. "Live differently." Outside the ballroom, cold air met his face, and for the first time in years, it felt like home. Jonathan followed him to the doors. "I wish I could repay you," he said. Elijah chuckled lightly. "Then repay someone else." Their eyes met in the kind of silence that says everything. Behind them, the doors slowly closed on an era, one built on greed and open to grace. The next morning, news of the night spread, not through press releases or headlines, but through people. Attendees called their companies, their families, their cities. Donations surged, but more importantly, hearts opened. Jonathan walked through his office that day not as a boss, but as a servant. Claire began drafting the blueprint for a foundation, one that would find and fund stories like Elijah's. Michael stepped away from the spotlight, choosing to mentor youth instead of chase fame. And Elijah? He vanished from cameras entirely, leaving behind not a brand, but a blessing. Sometimes the greatest miracles are the ones that leave no signature at all. Weeks later, a plaque was placed at the entrance of the next summit. It read, "True wealth is not what we own, but what we give away." No one knew where Elijah had gone. Only that he was seen once, handing a cup of coffee to a stranger and smiling as dawn broke over the city. Jonathan often looked out from his office window, not toward the skyline, but downward, toward the people. Claire's foundation flourished. Michael's students began calling him the teacher of second chances. The world hadn't changed overnight, but hearts had. And in the quiet spaces between their new lives, a single truth still whispered. Sometimes angels wear worn coats. The city awoke in golden light, streets washed clean by a night of quiet rain. Jonathan stood by his window, watching people hurry below, the world carrying on, but different somehow. His reflection stared back, not as the man who once worshipped wealth, but as one who finally learned to kneel. On his desk sat a photo, Elijah on stage, eyes alive with compassion. Jonathan whispered softly, "You gave me back my soul." He turned toward the morning sun, the light spilling across his face like forgiveness. Somewhere beyond those towers, Elijah walked unseen, his footprints blending into the rhythm of life. A reminder that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones that vanish when the message is complete. Across town, Claire stood in a modest classroom where laughter filled the air. Children painted murals of kindness and hope, part of the new foundation she built in Elijah's name. She smiled as a little boy tugged her sleeve and asked, "Was he real?" Claire knelt beside him. "Very real," she said softly, "but maybe he was also a reminder that love can show up in any form, even one we're too proud to see." She looked toward the window, where sunlight cut through dust in soft beams. For a moment, she could almost hear Elijah's calm voice saying, "Keep teaching what cannot be bought." And she did. Every single day. Michael Cruz found himself back where he started, on a stage. But this time there were no lights, no cameras, no applause. Just a small community center filled with young dreamers who hung on his every word. "You want to be great?" he said, voice steady. "Then serve. That's where greatness begins." He smiled, remembering Elijah's face, the calm defiance in his eyes. "I used to chase success. Now I chase purpose." The crowd cheered softly, not for show, but from the heart. As he stepped down from the small platform, he whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. The echo of that night, that homeless man's truth, had turned a speaker into a servant. Meanwhile, in a quiet park just beyond the city's edge, an old man sat feeding pigeons beneath an oak tree. The sun dipped low, painting the world in honey and bronze. A boy approached shyly, holding a notebook. "Mister, are you Elijah?" The man chuckled softly. "People call me lots of things," he said, "but I'm just someone trying to keep the world warm." He handed the boy half a sandwich, smiling as the child sat beside him. They ate in silence, two souls at peace. No fame, no spotlight, just life, simple and full. And when the boy turned to ask another question, the bench was empty. Only the sandwich remained, and the air still carried a trace of grace. Night fell over the city, calm and endless. Somewhere, a street lamp flickered as wind brushed through the empty sidewalks. The plaque, outside the new foundation, gleamed beneath a soft glow. "True wealth is not what we own, but what we give away." Inside, laughter and light filled the rooms that Elijah had inspired. Jonathan stood at the window, eyes lifted toward the sky. "Thank you," he whispered, and in that quiet, as the city's hum faded into stillness, a faint voice seemed to answer. Not in words, but in feeling. The sense that somewhere beyond sight, the man in the worn coat was still walking, carrying hope for those yet to find it. The final benediction: love remains.